The Sahara sun burned over the endless dunes, yet a shadow moved beneath the waves of heat. Dr. Amina Khalid adjusted her field hat and peered through the shimmering air. Something massive had left deep impressions in the hard sand. They were not camel prints. They were wider, longer, and fresher than any fossilized track should be. The desert wind whispered through the canyons, as if carrying an ancient warning. In the silence, a distant rumble rolled like thunder from under the earth. Amina felt her heart pound. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the legend of the Afravinator had awakened. Dr. Amina Khalid had always believed that history was buried deep in the earth, waiting for patient hands to reveal it. Born in the bustling city of Cairo, she had grown up surrounded by relics of civilizations long gone. Her fascination, however, had never been with pyramids or pharaohs. From her earliest days, she had been drawn to the creatures that roamed Africa long before humans existed. By the time she completed her doctorate in paleontology, she was already known among her peers as relentless in her pursuit of the truth. Her latest expedition had brought her far from the city into the vast emptiness of the Sahara Desert. The location was remote even by fieldwork standards. It lay beyond the reach of regular tourist caravans, beyond the scattered Bedouin camps, and far from any paved roads. This was the heart of an ancient seabed, now turned to stone and sand. Layers of sediment and rock here held fossils from the Jurassic period, when dinosaurs ruled the land and the seas. Amina's small team included Samuel Ortiz, a skilled geologist with an eye for unusual formations, and Tariq Hammond, a young field assistant who had grown up in the desert. Tariq knew how to read the land like a book. He could tell from the way the wind blew across the dunes whether a storm was coming, or from the way the sand shifted, whether something large had moved through recently. Their supplies were minimal. Water fuel excavation tools and recording equipment were packed into 2 battered jeeps. They had been working for 6 days under the punishing heat. The air shimmered with mirages by midday, and at night the desert turned cold enough to make breath visible. Their progress was slow. The dig site revealed bones, but mostly fragments, pieces of marine reptiles, ancient fish, and smaller dinosaurs. Nothing matched the scale of the discovery Amina was hoping for. She had come here following the word of an old field report from the 1960s that described massive theropod bones unlike any cataloged species at the time. The report mentioned the name Afravinator, a predator, supposedly larger and more dangerous than most found in this region. By day, they dug and cataloged. By evening, they huddled around a small camp stove sharing tea and stories. Tariq often spoke of old desert legends, tales of shadows that moved at night across the dunes, leaving no trace come morning. Amina listened with polite interest, though she treated them as myths. She was a scientist. Evidence was her guiding principle. Yet the more time she spent out there, the more she felt the desert had its own kind of presence. The wind seemed to carry whispers. The silence between gusts felt heavy. On the 7th morning, Samuel discovered something unusual. A large exposed rock outcrop had what looked like claw marks gouged deep into its surface. The grooves were long and evenly spaced, as if made by something with enormous talons. They could not be the work of modern animals, and they were too fresh to have been carved centuries ago. Amina examined them closely. The edges of the marks were sharp, unweathered by sand or wind. She noted the location and ordered the team to search the surrounding area. Within hours, Tariq called out from behind a dune. He had found a series of depressions in the ground. They were like footprints, but deeper and broader than any Amina had ever seen. Judging by their depth, whatever made them was heavy and strong. As the sun began to set, a distant rumble echoed across the horizon. It was not the wind. It was not the shifting of sand. It was low, steady, and unsettling. Amina could not explain why, but in that moment she felt as though the past she sought to uncover had stepped forward into the present. The desert was not as empty as it seemed, and the name of Afravinator no longer belonged to history alone. The night after they found the strange claw marks, the desert changed. Amina lay in her tent listening to the wind push against the fabric walls. Normally, the Sahara's night sounds were predictable, the sigh of sand shifting the occasional cry of a distant desert fox. But tonight there was something else. A deep rhythmic vibration rolled through the ground in short intervals. It felt like standing too close to a massive drum. Each thump made the tent poles quiver. She sat up and unzipped the flap. The camp was bathed in pale moonlight. Samuel was already outside with a flashlight in hand, scanning the dunes. Tarek crouched near the jeeps, his eyes fixed on a ridge to the east. "You hear it, too?" Amina asked. Tarek nodded slowly. It has been coming closer since sunset. Before she could respond, another sound cut through the night, a sharp guttural roar unlike anything she had ever heard. It was not the cry of a lion or a hyena. It was deeper, more primal, and it rolled across the desert like thunder. The three of them froze. The sound came again, this time closer. Samuel's grip on the flashlight tightened. That was not an echo, he muttered. Amina's scientific mind fought to rationalize it. No living predator in the region could make such a noise. And yet her instincts told her it was no trick of the wind. She motioned for the others to stay quiet and reached for the small field camera they used to document nocturnal desert life. The vibrations grew stronger until she could see the ripple in her cup of water sitting on the folding table. Then movement on the ridge. At first it seemed like part of the dune itself was shifting, but then the shape rose higher, blocking part of the moonlight. A ridge of spines caught the glow, each one jagged and irregular. Amina's breath caught. The figure moved with slow, deliberate steps. Even at a distance, it was massive. Long forelimbs ended in claws that glinted faintly. Its tail swept the sand in broad arcs. The logical part of her mind whispered that it was impossible. A fravinator was a creature of the Middle Jurassic, extinct for over 100 million years. But the evidence before her was undeniable. Every textbook illustration she had ever seen came alive in that silhouette. Without thinking, she clicked the camera's shutter. The sound was barely audible, but the shape on the ridge stopped moving. Its head turned. Moonlight revealed eyes that reflected gold for an instant before the beast let out another roar, louder than before. It began to descend the slope. Sand poured down in miniature avalanches beneath its weight. The ground trembled more violently now. Samuel grabbed Amina's arm. "We need to leave. Now!" Tarek was already loading gear into the jeep, his movements quick and silent. The thing was halfway down the ridge when the engine finally turned over. Headlights swept across the sand, catching the creature's outline for a brief moment. The ridge backed the muscular legs of Narrow Skull. It was real. As the jeep lurched forward, the fravinator gave chase. For something so large, it moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance in seconds. Its shadow fell over them, and for a heartbeat Amina thought it would strike. But then it slowed, letting out a sound that was almost curious. They drove until the vibrations faded behind them. No one spoke until they stopped miles from camp. The desert was silent again, as if nothing had happened. Amina sat in the front seat, clutching the camera. She did not dare check the images yet. Her pulse was still racing, but in her mind one truth had already crystallized. The expedition was no longer about finding fossils. A fravinator was alive. The next morning the sun rose over an empty camp. Wind had erased every track they had made the night before. The ridge where they had seen the creature now looked like any other in the sea of dunes. Amina stood staring at it with the camera in her hands. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that silhouette against the moonlight. She finally powered the camera on and scrolled through the images. The first few were blurred smears of shadow and sand. Then came one frame where the moonlight caught the creature's spine back. It was grainy but clear enough to make her stomach tighten. Tarek stood beside her holding a mug of bitter tea. He said nothing for a while. Then he spoke in a low voice. "If you show that picture to anyone back home, they will laugh. Or they will think we have gone mad." Samuel walked over from the jeep with a map in his hand. "We need to decide whether to continue the survey or pack up. I am not staying here another night unless we understand what we are dealing with." Amina knew he was right. The scientific part of her burned with the need to know more. The cautious part of her knew how dangerous it could be. She closed the camera. "We go back to the ridge today, but we move in daylight, and we leave if we see anything." They packed light and set out on foot. The air shimmered with heat as they crossed the sand. When they reached the base of the ridge, the slope looked steeper than it had at night. Amina led the way using a rock hammer to steady her steps. At the top, they found something that erased any doubt. Impressions in the sand shaped like three-toed feet, each larger than a dinner plate. They were spaced in long strides leading down toward a shallow valley. Samuel crouched beside one print, measuring it with his tape. This is over 70 centimeters. That would make the animal at least 9 meters long. Tarek scanned the horizon with his binoculars. No movement, but I see bones. Down there, in the valley, they found the sun-bleached remains of some large animal. Ribs jutted from the sand like ivory spears. Many were scored with deep parallel grooves, as if from claws or teeth. Flies buzzed around scraps of dried flesh, still clinging to one leg bone. "This kill is recent," Samuel said grimly. "Days at most." Amina took samples while the others kept watch. Every sound in the heat-hazed air made her jump. She kept glancing back at the ridge, expecting to see that spine shape appear again. By mid-afternoon, they returned to camp. The unease was heavier now. Tarek cleaned his rifle, though none of them believed bullets would be much use. Samuel pored over his notes, muttering about muscle attachment points and bite force. Amina downloaded the camera images to her laptop. The best shot of the creature's back she saved to a hidden folder. That night, they kept the fire going, though the fuel was precious. The light flickered against the tents, casting long, thin shadows. Every so often one of them would pause mid-sentence and listen to the night. No vibrations came, but the silence felt loaded like the pause before a storm. The second day, they searched farther from camp. The valley's edge led to a series of rocky outcrops where the sand gave way to hard stone. In a shaded hollow, they found more prints, along with deep scratches carved into the rock itself. These were not the random marks of erosion. They were deliberate, powerful gouges. "This is territorial," Samuel said, running his fingers over the grooves. "Predators mark their range. This one covers a lot of ground." Amina took more photos. She was beginning to think the creature moved through this region regularly. If so, they might be in the center of its hunting grounds. They debated leaving again. Tarek argued that no discovery was worth their lives. Samuel countered that proof of a living dinosaur would change everything they knew about evolution and extinction. Amina listened without speaking. Her decision was already forming. She could not walk away. That night the vibrations returned. Soft at first, like a heartbeat felt through the sand. They grew stronger until the water cans rattled against the supply crates. Tarek gripped his rifle. Samuel switched off the lantern, so they sat in near darkness, with only the moon overhead. A shadow moved along the edge of camp. The outline of the spine back was unmistakable. The Afravinator stopped near the tents, sniffing the air. Its head turned toward them. Moonlight glinted off its narrow teeth. For several seconds it stood motionless. Then it stepped closer. The ground shivered under each footfall. Amina's mind screamed to run, but her body stayed frozen. The creature stopped just outside the circle of firelight. It made a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in her chest. Then it turned and walked away, vanishing into the dunes. They barely breathed until the last tremor faded. In the morning, they found fresh prints circling the camp. The tracks were so close to her tent flap that Amina could see where one claw had nicked the canvas. It was no longer just curiosity that kept her there. It was the realization that the Afravinator was aware of them. It had chosen not to attack. Yet, they decided to follow its trail. It led them deeper into the desert through narrow canyons where the heat was trapped between the walls. They moved, cautiously stopping often to listen. The prints led to an oasis, a patch of green in the endless gold. Palm trees clustered around a deep pool. Near the water's edge, they found more bones and signs of large animals coming to drink. The Afravinator had a perfect hunting spot here. The sight made Amina shiver. They hid in the rocks above the oasis and waited. Hours passed. Just when the heat haze began to blur, her vision movement caught her eye. The Afravinator stepped from the shade of the palms. It lowered its head to drink the muscles in its neck, shifting under the skin. Birds scattered from the trees. Seeing it in full daylight stripped away the last veil of doubt. The long jaw, the spines along its back to sheer scale. It was magnificent and terrifying. Amina's hands shook as she filmed. Then it stopped drinking and looked directly toward their hiding place. For a long moment, no one moved. Then it began to walk toward the rocks. Tarek hissed for them to retreat. They scrambled back to the canyon as the creature's pace quickened. Sand sprayed under its feet as it closed the distance. A roar echoed off the stone walls, so loud it made Amina's ears ring. They ran until the canyon opened onto the dunes. The Afravinator slowed at the edge of the rock and watched them go. It did not follow. When they reached camp again, exhaustion hit all three of them. But the decision was made. They could not keep running. If they wanted to survive and learn the truth, they would have to face it. That night they prepared. Samuel sketched a plan for a hide near the oasis where they could watch and record without being seen. Tarek gathered every scrap of rope and canvas they had. Amina checked the camera batteries twice. The rising moon lit the sand in silver. Somewhere out there the Afravinator moved unseen. The hunt, on both sides, was about to begin. The hide was ready before dawn. They had built it from canvas stretched over a low frame of driftwood and anchored it with stones. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a dark outcrop against the sand. Inside it was cramped and hot, but they could see the oasis clearly through a slit at the front. Amina's pulse thudded in her ears as she set up the camera. Samuel lay beside her with his notebook and a pair of binoculars. Tarek crouched near the back with his rifle across his knees. The plan was simple. Stay silent, capture the footage, and leave before the creature noticed them. Hours passed in suffocating heat. The only sound was a faint rustle of palm fronds. A lizard skittered over the canvas and paused to blink at Amina before darting away. Sweat dripped down her spine, soaking her shirt. Then the birds exploded from the trees. Their sudden cries echoed through the canyon of palms. Tarek tensed his grip on the rifle. Samuel froze mid-note. The Afravinator stepped into view. Its spine back cut a jagged silhouette against the pale sky. Muscles rolled under its hide as it moved with slow, deliberate steps to the water's edge. Its head lowered, and its jaws parted to drink. The ripple of each swallow shivered across the surface of the pool. Amina lifted the camera and began to film. Every detail leapt into focus. The scars along its flank, the way its claws dug into the damp sand, the rise and fall of its breath. She felt awe and fear in equal measure. Then it stopped drinking. Its head lifted. The eyes, dark and predatory, fixed on the hide. The moment stretched until it felt like time itself had stalled. A low growl rolled from its throat. It began to walk toward them. "Stay still," Samuel whispered, though his voice was almost too quiet to hear. The Afravinator's pace quickened. Sand shifted under its feet with each stride. The spines along its back seemed taller in the morning light. Its jaws opened just enough to show the curved teeth. At 10 meters, it broke into a run. "Out!" Tarek shouted as he shoved open the back flap of the hide. They scrambled into the blinding sun. The ground shook as the predator closed the gap. They sprinted toward the canyon. Amina clutched the camera to her chest, refusing to let go of the footage. The roar that followed them was so loud it felt like a physical force pushing them forward. Samuel tripped on a stone and went down hard. The Afravinator's shadow fell over him. Without thinking, Amina swung around and shouted, waving her arms to draw its attention. The creature's head snapped toward her. It lunged. She dove aside, feeling the rush of air as its jaws snapped shut where she had stood. Tarek fired twice, the cracks echoing across the dunes. The bullet struck the hide of its shoulder. It reared back with a roar of rage. "Move!" Tarek yelled, grabbing Samuel's arm. They staggered into the canyon with Amina right behind. The narrow walls forced the Afravinator to slow, but it still followed its claws, scraping stone with each step. The path twisted sharply. Ahead the canyon split. One branch sloped upward toward open desert, the other descended into shadow. Without time to debate, they took the downward path, hoping the narrow space would block the creature. For a moment it worked. The Afravinator paused at the turn, its head swinging, as if weighing whether to follow. Then it dropped to its belly and slid forward, using its claws to pull itself through. The sound of stone grinding against its spines made Amina's skin crawl. The canyon ended at a sheer drop into a dry riverbed. The wall was too steep to climb quickly. Trapped! Tarek turned to face the predator, reloading with shaking hands. Samuel searched for any ledge or foothold. Amina backed toward the dropper camera, still clutched tight. The Afravinator stepped into the open space, its head low, its tail swaying. It was close enough that she could smell the hot metallic scent of its breath. Then she noticed the overhang above its head. The stone was cracked and unstable. "Shoot the rock," she yelled. Tarek hesitated for only a second before aiming high. The first shot chipped the edge. The second sent a deep fracture racing across the surface. With a thunderous crack, the overhang collapsed. Stones crashed down in a cloud of dust, striking the creature's back and shoulders. It roared and staggered, trying to shake free. They ran past it while it thrashed among the falling debris. Samuel scrambled up the slope to the desert above. Tarek helped Amina follow, then pulled himself up last. When they looked back from the ridge, the Afravinator was still moving, but slower now, half buried in rock. It let out a final bellow that echoed across the sands before turning away, limping toward the oasis. They stood in the wind, gasping for breath. Amina glanced at the camera in her hands. The footage was still there. Proof that the creature was real. Proof they had survived. But the way it had looked at her made her certain of one thing. This was not over. The desert wind scraped over the ridge, carrying the last echo of the Afravinator's roar. None of them spoke for several minutes. They simply stood there with lungs burning and hearts pounding. The sun was climbing higher, and the heat shimmered off the dunes. Samuel was the first to move. He dropped to sit on a flat rock, rubbing his knee where he had fallen. "I thought I was done," he said between breaths. His voice was low and almost broken. Tarek scanned the horizon, his rifle still in his hands, though the barrel pointed toward the ground. "We cannot stay here," he said. "It will find a way out, and it will remember us." Amina nodded, though her eyes were fixed on the canyon below. Dust still drifted from the collapsed overhang. She could not see the predator, but she could feel its presence in the silence between gusts of wind. They turned away from the ridge and began to walk. Every step in the sand was slow and heavy. The weight of what had happened pressed on all of them. Amina clutched the camera, as if letting go would make their ordeal meaningless. She knew the footage was more than proof. It was a story of survival. They reached a stretch of hard ground where the dunes gave way to scattered stones. The land sloped downward toward a faint glimmer of green in the distance. Tarek guessed it was another small oasis, and they decided to head there. Water was the one thing they could not ignore. The walk was silent, except for the crunch of boots on stone. Samuel limped but refused to slow them down. Tarek kept glancing over his shoulder, though nothing moved in the heat haze. Amina's mind replayed the moment when the Afravinator's eyes locked with hers. She could still hear the sound of its claws, scraping rock. By the time they reached the new oasis, the sun was fierce overhead. They knelt by the shallow pool and drank in long, desperate pulls. The cool water eased the tightness in their throats, but did little to calm the pounding in their chests. Tarek filled the canteens and then sat under the shade of a palm. "We were lucky," he said finally. "That rock fall saved us." Samuel let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Luck, or instinct," he said, looking at Amina. "You saw the overhang when I saw nothing but teeth." Amina did not answer right away. Her hands rested on the camera. "It was both," she said. "But luck will not save us again if we meet it." They stayed in the shade for an hour, letting their strength return. Birds flitted through the trees, and a dragonfly hovered over the water. The peace felt fragile, like a thin shell that could crack at any second. As they prepared to leave, Samuel suggested heading back to the village. He argued that they had proof, and there was no need to risk more. Tarek agreed, but his eyes held something darker. "We have proof," he said, "but we also have a creature out there that knows what we are." The walk back toward familiar ground took the rest of the day. Shadows stretched long across the dunes, and the air cooled. By the time the first lights of the village flickered in the distance, they were exhausted. At the edge of the village, children ran to greet them, but stopped when they saw their faces. The elders came forward listening as Samuel told the story in slow, careful words. When Amina showed them the footage, a hush fell over the crowd. The image of the Afravinator drinking at the oasis filled the small screen, and no one dared speak until it ended. An old man shook his head. "This is a spirit of the desert," he said. "It will not forgive you for disturbing it." That night, they stayed in Samuel's small house near the edge of the village. The air was cool, but none of them slept well. Each sound outside made Tarek reach for his rifle. Amina lay awake staring at the ceiling with the weight of the camera. Beside her, she thought about how close they had come to being nothing more than bones in the sand. When dawn came, the three of them sat together in silence. Outside, the village stirred to life, but the memory of the roar and the shadow that fell over Samuel was still too near. They had escaped, yet the desert felt different now, as if it had a mind watching from just beyond the horizon. The sun rose slow over the desert, painting the sand in gold and the air with a faint smell of dust. In the village square, the morning voices of merchants and children began to replace the silence of the night. Yet for Amina, Samuel, and Tarek, the light brought no sense of return to normal. They met outside the small house, each carrying the marks of the past days. Samuel's limp was still there, though lighter than before. Tarek's eyes were sharper, always drifting toward the horizon, as if expecting a shadow to appear. Amina had tied the camera to her satchel, yet her hand rested on it often. They walked to the edge of the village where the dunes began. The vast openness seemed calm, yet they knew better. Somewhere out there the Afravinator still walked. Its lair might be buried under rock, but such a predator would not remain trapped forever. Samuel spoke first, his voice steady. "We have a choice. We can tell the world what we saw, or we can keep this to ourselves and hope it never comes this way again." Tarek shook his head. "If we say nothing, others will go searching. Treasure hunters, scientists, explorers. They will not know what waits for them." Amina looked between them. "The footage is real and it will change everything. People will argue whether it is genuine or a trick, but some will believe, and those people will prepare." They stood in silence for a moment. The desert wind stirred, lifting a curl of sand that danced between their feet. Finally, Samuel sighed. "Then we tell the truth. Even if they doubt us, our duty is to warn them." That afternoon, they gathered with the elders once again. The small meeting hall was warm and filled with the scent of dried herbs hanging from the beams. Amina played the footage one more time, describing the events in careful detail. She avoided dramatics, letting the images speak for themselves. The elders listened, their faces grave. When she finished, an elder named Khadijah spoke. "This land has held secrets longer than any of us have lived. You have touched one of those secrets. Now you carry the weight of it." They were given permission to leave the village with their story, though the elders asked them to speak with respect for the land and the life it holds. The villagers offered food and water for the journey to the city. 2 days later, they arrived at the outskirts of a busy port town. The noise and smell of it were almost overwhelming after the silence of the dunes. They found a small inn and rented a room where Amina set up the camera and downloaded the footage to multiple devices. She sent copies to trusted colleagues and a few science contacts she had worked with before. The responses came quickly. Some were stunned. Others laughed it off as an elaborate special effect. A few asked how soon they could mount an expedition. Samuel warned them in every reply. "This is not a game. If you go, be ready to face something beyond your training." Weeks passed. The desert called to them, but none of them returned. Reports began to surface of strange sightings along the edges of the dunes. Large prints in the sand. A roar carried on the wind at night. Most dismissed them as myths. But for Amina, Samuel, and Tarek, each report was another reminder that their encounter had not been the last. One evening, Amina stood on the balcony of her small apartment overlooking the harbor. The sun sank into the sea, and the gulls wheeled overhead. She thought of the Afravinator not as a monster, but as a survivor like them. It had lived unseen for ages, relying on instinct and the harsh mercy of the desert. She whispered into the wind. We both walked away. The sound of the waves answered softly. Somewhere far beyond the reach of city lights, under the cold stars of the desert, a shape moved through the sand. It carried the weight of its own survival and the memory of 3 humans who had dared to cross its path. Life in the city continued as normal, yet for Amina, every horizon held the possibility that one day they would meet again. If that day came, she would be ready.